Hi all, Rick here, with a video breaking down the lore on a new-ish vessel from Beta Canon, the starship that followed in the Sovereign's footsteps, the Noble Class. Now, the teams over at Star Trek Online have also granted me 10 codes for a T6 vessel as a giveaway, so stay tuned for more on that. Before I touch on its lore, let's look at its real-life creation. So, the Noble Class was designed originally to be a poster ship for the game Star Trek Online, as a different interpretation of the Sovereign class, set in the year 2409. However, it was redesigned in 2026, with that new iteration originally going to be a separate vessel, but during development its similarities to the existing Noble were noted, so the Noble was simply altered. With this came a sort of retcon of the lore, bringing the ship more in line with the Sovereign class inspiration and subsequent lore that had been introduced. The new versions was designed by Jamie Armstrong Hughes while modelled by Tobias Richter and implemented into the game by Pundus. The ship was created to fulfill a gameplay role in the fleet as a needed Sovereign class variant. Therefore it had to abide by a Sovereign skeleton shape, as in the game, parts are interchangeable. The full tale of the ship's design and origin can be found in an interview with the STO devs did with Stu1701 over on his YouTube channel, link in the description, and it covers lots of little interesting design details straight from the people who made it. So, on to its in-universe lore now. The Noble Class was created from the same development project that led to the Sovereign but years down the line. Whereas the Sovereign class was designed to be a more heavily armed multi-mission vessel and carried extensive survey and diplomatic capabilities, it was still more of a warship thanks to the era. The Noble, originally, was created to function as a new and true multi-role exploration vessel based on the Sovereign's success, and began development around 2380. Thanks to, or perhaps in spite of, the varied mission profile, it was still the beneficiary of numerous combat-related upgrades. The nacelles were plated with heavier armour, the overall profile was compacted even further than the already necklace Sovereign. Other details too crept in, like smaller windows and a reduced deflector to lessen vulnerabilities, and the overall crew complement was reduced. The prototype was the USS Noble NX-91001, which launched sometime in the late 2380s. This would have coincided with the development of the Inquiry class and post-synth attack on Mars, perhaps explaining the sudden increase in defensive equipment. By the end of the development project, the Noble class was more of a battleship than the Sovereign had been, so one more addition was made that was not present on the prototype Noble at its launch. This was the supplemental roll bar between the nacelles that carried a variable mission pod. By the time the Noble was recommissioned into service as the NCC 91888, there existed a sensor-laden version and a torpedo pod version, much like the variability introduced to the Miranda or Nebula class. I mentioned a giveaway. So, in order to enter, you just need to comment a ship suggestion from Star Trek Online that you'd like to see me cover and tag it with the word Certifiably to make it easier to find. Entries will be selected at random and I'll contact and confirm the winners next week to dispense the prize codes. Just make sure it's definitely me that is responding to your comment. I'll do the heart-like thing to verify. Alright, on to the video. The Noble was 692 metres long, 243 wide and 92 tall, with a mass of 3,200,000 metric tonnes. It looks to have somewhere between 18 to 20 decks, so internally the vessel contains several upgrades, including the implementation of bioneural circuitry to allow for faster and smarter programming. Additionally, most interiors were lined with hollow emitters for the creation of emergency holographic crew, at this time mostly consisting of medical teams and security officers. I did note, however, that it only supports 4 transporter array convectors, and they're all on the underside, so I guess it has to belly roll to beam above it. Hence the roll bar! In terms of sensor systems, alongside comparable equipment to its contemporaries, It had implemented the previously experimental exoprobe technology combined with wearable visor-based remote piloting. This allowed for a connected pilot to assume control of the probe and manipulate it with greater accuracy, as seen when the tech was in its trial phase. There was also extensive cargo and shuttle carrying capacity, with the main shuttle bay being along the spine with 2 major hangar bay doors connecting to a central fly-through. At the very rear of the vessel was the secondary shuttle bay. In terms of warp, it held a Class 10 warp drive comparable to the Sovereign which inspired it. It also had a quantum sublimating theta matrix compositor for recrystallizing dilithium. Nailed it in one take. This gave it a maximum warp speed of 9.985 and a cruise factor of warp 8, and a theoretically longer period between maintenance stops. It's worth noting that the latest Sovereign classes, moving in the 25th century, actually attained a higher factor of warp of 9.995. The twin impulse drives are split into 6 efficient engines on the saucer, granting a decent level of manoeuvrability but nothing exceptional. When it comes to armaments, the ship is listed as having 16 Type 8 phaser arrays. However, on the revamped model, there appears to be a total of 10. 6 strips around the saucer, top and bottom, 2 on the nacelle pylons facing up, and 2 on the keel. There are 6 torpedo tubes optimised for quantum torpedoes, though being a Starfleet vessel, of course they double for any payload or generic probe. These tubes are 2 forwards facing and 4 rear facing. They're a little different on the refit version of the Noble, with not only the additional roll bar providing 2 more torpedo tubes capable of a barrage fire, but alterations to the phaser arrays. On the top, in addition to the 2 main phasers, there are 4 early phaser Lotus prototypes. On the underside, the 4 arrays have been entirely converted into 4 more of these. This is a weapon that would go on to feature on the Chimera class as captained by Nog, which I've also covered. Essentially, it is an array that can fire in short periods of full yield bursts at multiple targets, in an attempt to counter the power drain such a widespread barrage would usually incur. By the time of the ship's production, the prior Type 8 phaser systems had been swapped out for the heavier hitting Type 14. For its defences, the ship was clad in ablative tetraburnium hull alloy to dissipate impacts, which grants it this darker, chunkier look. Around it were the latest in regenerative shielding technology, and while all shields are regenerative, these were especially so. The large swaths of panelling on the sides of the saucer were the wide shield emitters to reinforce the flanks of the vessel. While not reflected in game, the ship was envisioned as broadsiding more so than a front-on attack. Now, the ship's fictional history is shaped by its real development. Originally, it was designed as a multi-role explorer, to take the Sovereign's success as a combat vessel and return some of its wider mission variety that was forfeit in that design. However, at some point during the development, perhaps spurred on by the loss of Utopia Planitia, the parameters shifted. By the time the developments were completed, the ship was an even more heavily armed and capable combat ship than the idea that spawned it. To compound this, a refit was commissioned later in its life to bolster its battle potential, but not every ship received that. In fact, most of the Nobles were never overhauled, and they slid into the role they were originally to occupy, gradually replacing the Sovereign class. The Inquiry class entered as a mass-produced defensive ship made for larger response deployments, and that ship's ease of production effectively replaced this vessel by the turn of the century, by using less advanced but more focused technology. They were simply less intensive to build than the Noble, and this ship, despite its overhauls, did not become the main protective asset of the Federation. Nevertheless, efforts were made to keep the Noble line at the top of the fleet, with the refit program outclassing Inquiry vessels in quality, if not quantity. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the Noble Class Starship, a recent favourite of mine, and definitely one I wanted to do justice. I hope to be able to send out these codes soon. Thanks to STO for providing them, to Stu1701 for letting me reference his interview, and I've been Rick, and until the next one, goodbye. The Noble class was designed originally to be a poster ship for the game Star Trek Online, as a different interpretation of the Discord notification sound. For its defences, the ship was clad in